I'd like to talk about, or I had mentioned last week, certain ideas, which I think, a lot of people would find to be very interesting. The concept of Ashkenazim and the concept of Sfardim, which I mentioned last week. You see. So in order to begin that, we have to go into a very important area, which I had spoken a little about before, and that is that who are the people responsible, really, to do what's called a Tikun? That's the question. We call that a misaken, but you would say metaken. Who are those people who are supposed to correct or repair the creation itself? Now, the essential idea we know is that there are two. When you think about it, there are several realities or dimensions that exist. One is the dimension of God Himself, and that reality of God, we have absolutely no concept of what that is. We do not know who He is, really. We don't know how He exists, who He is in and of Himself, and so on. We don't know how He creates or anything like that. But we do know that He exists. And what He decided to do is to create a reality other than Him. And that reality is called Zulato, which means other. And therefore God created a reality which is other than Him. And that was a creation, you see, because it had to be brought out from something out of nothing. Because before that, nothing else existed but God. Nothing. That's a very important idea. So anything that God created has to be, or anything that exists besides Him, has to be brought from nothing into something. It has to be created. So what He did is He created several realities. And these are all called Zulato, which means other than Him. So the first thing that He created was the concept of Olam Haba. What does that mean? Well, I'm not going to go into the whole idea, but He created a reality that really is the future world. And we do not know really anything about that, but it is a very different reality that we are in. And then now in that reality, God is manifest, which means that He is exposed. In that reality, you can experience God. Besides the reality of what He called Olam Haba, He also He created a reality called Olam Hazeh, this world, or the present world. Now, what that reality is a reality which we understand is not Olam Haba. It is the reality that is part of us. Now, that reality itself is divided into different aspects or different kinds, you see. That reality has 4 different levels of reality. One level of reality is called Atzilut, which is a reality that the presence of God inhabits, nothing else. And it is in that reality that God can be known, so to speak. The second reality is called Olam Bria, which is a reality that has angels, malachim, but mostly it has it has a very high order of malachim, and it is also the reality that God created in which the neshamot originate. Then there's a reality below that, which is called Yetzirah, and that is a reality primarily inhabited by malachim. And there are 10 different categories of malachim. So that is the reality called Yetzirah. And then finally he created the lowest reality, which is called Asiyah.
Don't stole my charger.
What was
I
that?
have my charger here.
Mute yourself. Please mute yourself. Okay, Rabbi.
In any case, so God created a fourth reality, and all four are called Olam Hazeh, which is called Olam Asiyah, the world of action, because this is a world that action has to be done. And that itself consists of two sub-areas. One area is a physical universe, the universe that we inhabit. And the second aspect of that reality of Olam Asiyah is spiritual. And it contains 7 different heavens. That's what it's called. Each one is different. But they're all part of Olam Hazeh. It is dominated by, besides the Neshamot, it's dominated by Malachim, by Shadim, by all kinds of things that we can, in a certain sense, experience. In any case, that's the 4 realities, which is called Olam Hazeh. And then there's a reality above that, which is called Olam Haba. And Kabbalistically, that is called Adam Kadmon, which means primordial man. That's what it's called. And that is the future world, which ultimately, in the end, will be the only world that exists, you see. Now, what God therefore now wants, now what he also did is he created Sefirot. A Sefirah is a force. It is a spiritual force of which what it really is unknown. But it is a force which God uses, and that force can create realities, you see. And he has basically 10 Sefirot. There are 10 of these forces that God created, and he uses them. And all 10 create all the realities. They create the first reality, which is the highest, which is the future world. And then what happens is they diminish in their output. It's like a 1,000-watt bulb that diminishes in its output, its light, and it becomes dimmer. They also diminish in their output, and because of that, the realities that they create is much more gross, and they diminish further and further. And they create the future world, Olam Haba, and they also create the 4 lower worlds, which is called Olam Hazeh, you see. So they are actual forces that create all the realities that are part of what's called the Bria, this creation. And that's an important idea. Now, we inhabit, of course, the 4th level, which is Olam Asiyah, which is the bottommost level, and that is physical. Now, we understand that what determines the type of the reality is to what extent does the Sefirot, 10 of them, diminish in terms of the output. You call the output or illumination. It's not really a light, but obviously it means some type of a force that they can create, and they create realities. But they diminish in power purposely. So therefore, the product of what is created is also diminished. Finally, they create a reality called Olam Asiyah, which is the bottom or the last reality of this world. And they create it, and as a result of that, you now have 5 distinct realities other than God. Like I said, you have Adam Kadmon, which is the primordial man, and that is the highest reality, of which nobody knows what it is, and that is the reality that all the Neshamot will exist in the future. That is Olam Haba. And then you have Olam Hazeh, which consists of 4 realities, and each one of them has different aspects to it. But the main idea is that they're all created based on the diminishment of the output of the Sefirot. You see. Now, God now takes the neshama. Now, the origin of the neshamot is in the third reality from the bottom, which is Bria. It's part of Olam Hazeh. And the origin of the neshama is in Olam Bria, which means that its origin is there. However, that neshama can travel to a certain extent, or it spreads all the way to Olam Asiya, and then it's inserted into a physical body. So really, each person has a neshama that is separate and distinct from his physical body, because the physical body is part of the reality of Olam Asiya, the lowest part, which is the physical universe. But the neshama is inserted into that guf. And therefore, every person is a combination of a neshama, which is a spiritual aspect, soul, and also a physical body. That's what the neshama does. Now, this is very, obviously very important and so on. Now, what God wants is the following. He makes the Sefirot diminish in their output, their or their illumination, and therefore they create realities which are lower and lower and lower until he gets to the physical universe. And then he creates a physical body, and the physical body now has the neshama, which spreads from Olam Bria, the world of creation, all the way down to Olam Asiya, which is interesting. Now, therefore, what God wants is the following. The lower you get, the more concealed is the presence of God. And that's a very important idea. It's called Hester, which means concealment. What is concealed really? What is concealed is the reality of God as the only thing that really exists. Everything else is an emanation from God, even though we don't see it. We don't realize this. But we all emanate from God. But to us, that's invisible. We don't see that. If we were able to leave the body, so to speak, if our consciousness could leave the body and go up, let's say into the world above this, which is Yetzirah, then the reality of God would become much greater, where it would be obvious that God exists, because in a certain sense, you can actually feel his presence. If you go up higher the Yetzirah, and you go into what's called Bria, then the presence of God is much greater. So the Malachim that reside or inhabit Olam Bria are much closer to understanding God than the Malachim below. Because both in Yetzirah and Bria, the presence of God is incredibly manifest. It's like walking in the outside, and the sun is shining brightly. That's how obvious is the presence of God. Now, if you go higher into Atzilut, then that is, in many ways, that is the greatest manifestation that God has allowed. That's the Shekhinah, and therefore, in terms of what he wants people to realize who he is. Although that is not really who he is, it's merely what's called an expression or some type of a manifestation of his presence. But it's not him, because he is above all the worlds, really. And it is unknown who he is, where he is, and so on. Now, if you go from there, Atzilut, into Odom Kadmon, which is the future world, then that is the greatest experience you will ever have of God, because there is the greatest manifestation of God that ever will be. And what is interesting is that Olam Haba, the future world, is a manifestation that it's not that you're in Olam Haba and you experience God at a certain degree. No. Because in Olam Haba, the degree of his manifestation or his presence increases daily, if you want to use the word daily. You see? So therefore, Olam Haba is an infinite place that exists in infinite time. And every day that you're there, you experience more and more of God. Now, we don't know what that means, but there is a steady growth and experiencing of God in Olam Haba. And that is why Olam Haba is infinite. It never ends. Because the experiencing of God in a greater and greater way never ends. You see. So these are the 5 levels of reality that God created. But what does God want? Well, obviously, as long as you're in the physical world, you cannot experience God at all. You see, I mean, you can experience a certain very low level of presence, and that is the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash had a Shekhinah, which is a level of presence, but extremely minute. Yet for this world, it's incredible. But it is the lowest manifestation of his presence, the Shekhinah, in this world. So if you went to the Beit HaMikdash, on the holidays and whatever, as you went out, you made the pilgrimage and so on, you would actually feel something in the Beit HaMikdash. In fact, if you go today to the Kotel, you can actually feel a sort of presence of God, because the Shekhinah never really left. Although the Shekhinah itself is severely diminished from what it used to be, it is still there, you see. So when you go to the Kotel and you experience something there that's different than anywhere else, you are really experiencing somehow the Shekhinah or the presence of God, you see. Now, the question is, okay, how do we get from Olam Hazeh, which is this world, physical world, well, how do you get to Olam Haba? Well, I'm not going into how you get there in terms of what you have to do, in terms of, what you have to do. But what is interesting is the way you get to Olam Haba is you need to change Olam Hazeh, especially the world of Asiya, which is the lowest world. You need to change it back into Olam Haba. Yeah, that's right. That's called zikuch. Zikuch means to purify. It means to make purification of the physical matter, where physical matter actually begins to change, becomes translucent and then transparent, you see. So by doing that, you actually change the reality of this world, of the physical world, which is Olam Asiyah. You actually change it into a spiritual domain, and it takes time, but ultimately the physical world itself becomes Olam Haba. So that's really where Olam Haba is. Where is the future world? It is here. However, it is now in a physical form. But the purpose is to change the form, to retransform Olam Hazeh, which is the physical universe, which is Olam Asiyah, to retransform it into Olam Haba. A good example is water. Water has 3 forms. It has the form called ice, then it is water, liquid, then it's a gas called water vapor. But it's still water. but it has different forms. Well, if you have an ice, a bar of ice, whatever, you want to change it, you need to heat it. You need to apply heat. But if you apply heat, you'll change the ice into water, and if you apply more heat, you'll change the water into steam, which basically is water vapor. You see? So therefore, it's the same idea. This physical universe is like ice. It's very dense, it's very gross. But what God wants is what's called zikuch. He wants the Jewish people to change the physical matter higher and higher until ultimately the physical world turns into Olam Haba, the future world, which is interesting. That's what happens. And that takes a long time, you see. So the first thing that happens is this, and that's called Tikun. Tikun means to repair the world. Why? Well, to repair something means that it was damaged, and it was. Because originally the reality of everything was Olam Haba, was called Adam Kadmon, primordial man, the future world. But then, in a certain sense, it was damaged. Now, we know it was damaged because the Sefirot diminished their output. So therefore the reality became darker, grosser, you see, until finally it diminished to such an extent where the reality became physical. So therefore what God wants is to change the physical world into Olam Yetzirah, which is the one right above us. Then he wants that Olam Yetzirah to change into Bria. And then he wants the Bria to change into Atzilut. And then he wants to change Atzilut out of Olam Hazeh into Olam Haba, which is Olam Haba. See? So really, the way we experience Olam Haba is by changing the nature of Olam Hazeh. And that's what happens. So, it takes, to start the process, takes 6,000 years. And that's the Tikun process. That's how long it takes to begin to pull the switch. Okay, now, so, for 6,000 years, the Jews labor to begin the process. Then the world changes from the year 6,000, which is the English year 2240. It changes, takes 1,000 years. It changes, it's at the end of 6,000, the world now changes into Olam Yetzirah, which is the world right above it, and remains that way for 1,000 years. And then, in 7,001 until 8,000, it changes into Bria, higher. And then from 8,000 till 9,000, it changes into Atzilut. And then beginning from 9,000, it changes into Olam Haba. You see? So really what it is, you can begin to look at the stages, you see, which I will go through. So basically the first stage is the physical stage, and that stage is where the Jews create the ability of zikuch, where zikuch can now take place. In other words, purification can now take place. That is zikuch, you see. Now, after 6,000, and I'm skipping over the Messianic era, and you'll understand where that fits in. So, like I say, from 6 to 7, the whole creation changes to Yetzirah. From 7 to 8, into Bria. From 8 to 9, into Atzilut. And from the beginning of 9,000, it becomes Olam Haba. And that world of Olam Haba grows, but it doesn't change to another reality In other words, whatever that reality is remains, but not in the same exposure of the Shekhinah. The Shekhinah gets greater and greater, and we are able to experience the Shekhinah greater and greater, you see. So it's a process. It's a process that starts off with Adam, or actually it starts off with God's creating everything. And like I say, he does that by diminishing the ore of the spheres. And they create different realities. And they create 5 of them. What God wants is to reverse the process, you see. And he reverses the process by changing Asiyah into Yitzirah, into Bria, into Atzilut, and then into Ilam Haba, which is Adam Kadmon, or primordial man. You see? That's what he does. But the question is how? So we now understand what happens. The Tikun, and this is the Tikun process. You see, but the question is, how do we do this? And the answer is, well, the only way to change reality from one into the next, or from a lower one into a higher one, is you got to get the Sefirot to illuminate more. Because the way it diminished, or the way the reality got worse, is because the Sefirot diminished, you see. So the way to get it to change, or the way to change reality, is you need to get it to illuminate more. So therefore, what the Jew does, and this is the secret of what he does, when the Jew does a mitzvah, as we will see, a mitzvah is a switch or a trigger. It triggers greater ore or illumination or power from the Sefirot, and they therefore shine, and they therefore change the reality from the lowest reality, which is Asiyah, to the highest, which is called Ilam Haba, or Adam Kadmon. You see, that's how you do it. You must get the Sefirot to shine, or to illuminate, or to give out tremendous amount of Kiddusha, holiness or power. And that's what reverses the entire sequence, the original sequence of creation, and it reverses it. Now the ones who do that are the Jews. They are called the Mitaknim. They are the ones who repair, you see. If you think about it, what a Jew really is, he's a repairman. If something's wrong with your car, what do? You bring it to a mechanic. So a mechanic repairs cars. If a person doesn't feel well, whatever, he goes to a doctor. So a doctor has to repair the health of the body. Electricians repair broken wires. Plumbers repair broken pipes that carry water or whatever. What does a Jew do? He does the same thing. He repairs. But what does he repair? What he repairs is the state of existence from a physical state unto the highest spiritual state of all, which is the future world. So when you think about it, that's why we are mitaknim. We repair, you see. But what we repair is the greatest of all, repairment and so on. Because we actually repair reality. And the reality that we repair is we bring in more and more presence of God. Because ultimately that's what the Sefirot do. When the Sefirot illuminate, what they illuminate is the presence of God. That's what they illuminate, you see. And that's the repair service that the Jews do. The greater the presence of God, the greater the degree of the Sefirot, the greater is the repair, you see. And that's really the difference between all the olamot. Between all the 5 olamot, the difference is to what extent is God present. At the lowest level in Olam Hazeh, he's barely present. But as you get higher, he's more and more visible. or present. And as you get higher, he's more visible, and the greatest visibility of God, and therefore you experience the greatest aspect of God, is in Olam Haba. And nobody, including the greatest malachim, angels, they have no concept, no comprehension of what that reality is. In other words, even though, for instance, in Olam Briah, they have the greatest malachim, obviously, and the reality or the presence of God is unbelievable. We cannot even begin to imagine what the presence of God is in that reality. That is infinitely zero compared to the reality of God in the future world. Can you imagine what that means? We can't. In other words, the difference between Briah and Odom Kadmoin, which is the reality of the future world, is infinite. So could you imagine what awaits a person that actually makes it to the future world? Now, we can begin to ask, okay, this is very interesting. We now understand, what the essential idea of creation is. It's different realities, different worlds. That's what it's called in Kabbalah. And each world varies depending on the experiencing of God, you see. So each reality, as we get lower, hides more and more God. And if you go higher, it reveals more and more God. But this is only from the beginning of the year 7000, which is 6,000, I should say, which is the English year 2240, which, by the way, is 210 years to go. Or I should say 220 years to go. But the question is, okay, but what's the difference between the reality of Mashiach? What happens in the Messianic era, you see? Well, we know what happens from Adam after the sin until the Mashiach will come, Mashiach ben Yosef. And that's basically that the world is physical, you see. So in the beginning of the physical world, right, there was an experience in God. There was a Shekhinah, because the Jews had the Beit HaMikdash, right? The first one was 410 years, and the second was 420 years. So there was an ability, so to speak, of experiencing the divine presence. But once that ends, you see, and this is the Zman of Tikun. So the Jews have done the Tikun, and now Mashiach ben Yosef arrives. Now, the job of the Mashiach ben Yosef, like I said, is to change the reality of Galut, the reality where God is concealed, you see, to a reality which is called the Messianic era, where God is revealed. But what is interesting is that God is revealed not the way He is in Yetzirah and above, you see. What is revealed in the reality of Olam Hazeh, because the Messianic era is the last era in Olam Hazeh. It is not the era of the spiritual worlds, but it is the last reality of Olam Hazeh. But that reality, God reveals Himself in a way which, again, is incomprehensible. But the difference is that you don't see, because the reality itself doesn't change as much, the presence of God changes. So therefore, man's relationship with God is incredible. And that's why all Jews in the era of the Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David will be prophets. Every Jew will be a Novi, every one. Men, women. And that means you can experience God even though you have a physical body. That's what's going to happen, you see. But you'll still have a physical body. But you'll be able to experience God within the physical in a way which we cannot even begin to comprehend. Like it says in the Novi, Ki molo ha'oretz deyo, and the earth was filled with the knowledge of God, like the waters covers the seabed. That means, and this is what the distinct concept of the Messianic era is that while you are still physical, because the reversal process does not start until the year 6000, which is the end of the Messianic era. You will be able to experience God as a physical person. And that is what's called the phenomenon of prophecy. That's what prophecy is. The ability to experience God even though you're physical. You see. And therefore, in the Messianic era, the presence of God will be experienced by all people. Now, besides that, there's something unique that happens in the Messianic era, but only in the time of Mashiach ben David, not ben Yosef. And that is Tchiat HaMesim, the resurrection of the dead. And that will make an enormous difference, because what happens is the resurrection of the dead takes place. That means that the body will awaken or arise from the grave without Zoyamo, without the input or the projective tumor of the Satan. Why? Because the Satan is still alive in the time of Mashiach ben Yosef. And Mashiach ben Yosef is the individual that ultimately changes the world to a messianic world. That's his job. However, in the messianic world, the Satan is either destroyed or is removed from his position of tum'ah, of enticing people to sin. He's no longer a Yetzer Hara, and he's no longer a Malach HaMavet. There's no death, you see, because it is the Zoyamo that kills. But if there's no Zoyamo, nobody dies. There's no sickness, no death, you see. It's just an incredible place. And what happens, therefore, is a body that has no Zoyamo can experience the presence of God in a way that we cannot even comprehend. And that begins the change. So, the first change, like I say, is the Mashiach ben Yosef, where all of a sudden you become aware of spirituality, you see. And that begins to change you. And this is ben Yosef. And somehow the whole consciousness of the Jews and even of Goyim change, where the reality of God is now obvious. However, people still have Zoyamo. So what happens next is Mashiach ben David arrives. And when he arrives, his job is to change the human form, which means he removes the Zoyamo, which is basically invisible. But it inhabits the human body, and it is responsible for decomposition. In fact, the whole concept of decomposition is because of Zoyamo. So what happens is that changes. So the human body no longer decomposes. There is no longer death or disease, because the Satan is removed totally. But what's interesting is all the people now die, whoever hasn't died, and then everybody has to get up. So if you haven't died, you die for 2 hours. But if you've been dead for, 1,000 years, you also get up. But everybody who now gets up has no Zoyamo. And therefore their ability to prophecy, to experience the divine presence, is unbelievable. You know where you see that? You see that by Yetzias Mitzrayim, when the Jews left Egypt, you see. And that was the first time in creation, as I mentioned in the Pesach Shiur, that the Zoyamo was being removed for 49 days. That means after 7 days, 1/7 of the Zoyamo was removed. And when they stood at Mount Sinai, Har Sinai, they had no Zoyamo, you see. And I mentioned what the whole problem then was. But in any case, they had no Zoyamo. And as a result of that, they only had 1/7 removed, which means they had 6/7. But 1/7 was removed. And therefore, by Yam Suf, a maidservant saw more of the divine presence. She saw more of the Kabbalistic ideas than Yecheskel Hanovi ever saw. And he's the one who introduced the whole concept of Kabbalah in the Ma'aseh Merkava, the story of the divine chariot, which is in the second perek of Yechezkel, which is the foundational ideas of Kabbalah. Why? Because the reason why was a maidservant, could you imagine everybody else who were Jews? The reason why they were able to experience God in a way which is unparalleled by any of the Nevi'im is because only 1/7 of the Zoyama was removed, because Kriyas Yamsuf happened on the seventh day. So what do you see? That is what happens in the Messianic era. We will be like that maidservant, and like all the Jews, that on the seventh day of Yetziat Mitzrayim, they had 1/7 of the Zoyama removed, and therefore they could experience God because they had no Zoyama. So all they had was a pure neshama in a physical body, you see? And therefore they could experience God in a way which we cannot even comprehend. This is what we will be in the time of Mashiach ben David, you see. But remember, we will still be physical, except we will be able to interact with God in the Messianic era. That's a very important idea, without Zoyama. But we'll still be physical, and the way we will interact with God is unbelievable prophetic ability, where everybody will be able to experience God and to know the divine secrets, because that's what happens when you experience God, that are accompanied with God himself. You see? So you now understand many important ideas. There's the time of Tikun. There is a time of Mashiach ben Yosef, which removes the Satan and all the Umas Ha'olam, the nations of the world, which I will get into more next week. And then you have the experiencing in the Mashiach ben David, where there's no Zoyama, and as a result of that, each person can now experience God in the physical, but in a way which we cannot even comprehend. The only parallel to that is the maidservant at Kriyas Yamsuf. And then after that, the Zikuch begins, which is the change in the physical itself. So in Olam Yetzirah, which is the between 6,000 and 7,000 year, then everybody will experience God, but not as a physical being. You see, he will experience God with a reversal of the physical. And that goes higher and higher and higher until you get to Olam Haba. And Olam Haba is experience God without any residue of physical. You see. And then God himself, because you have become a vessel, a keli to experience God, that will be the greatest experience imaginable. And we have absolutely no idea what that can possibly mean, you see. So you have now seen what's called the overview, the panorama of all the world's tikufot, what happens in the beginning and what happens in the end. You see? It's a very important idea, because you now have what's called a beautiful overview, scope of the totality of the existence of the world and its evolution or development into a higher world. And you now understand also what the Jews do. Is they introduce Zikuch, they allow the Sefirot to incredibly illuminate, and what that does, it begins to change the physical world into a spiritual, which is the opposite of what they did as they created the physical world, in which they diminished their power. You see? And this is, therefore, what you now understand, the scope, the panorama of really of the world history. You understand also exactly what you are in the Messianic era, you see. And you understand the mechanism of how it does. Next week, I want to get into the Metaken itself and how it changes. Also the concept of Sfardim and Ashkenazim, how that each one is a different Metaken and so on. Okay. Any questions? Hello?
Sefirot, because we don't really understand what the Sefirot are.
Well, nobody knows what they are. We do know what they do. They are a force that can create a reality.
So now we're up to number 9 of all the forces, and we're waiting to get to number 10?
Well, I didn't go into the differences, but we are basically influenced by 7 of the forces,
So
and not the higher 3. But nobody knows what a Sefirah is. It's some type of a force that God uses. For instance, how many fingers do you have? If anybody's not sure, please look at your hands.
10.
Why do we have 10 fingers? Because we are a model of the creation. And since God has 10 Sefirot, which are basically his fingers, therefore we have 10 fingers. See? Our 10 fingers model his 10 fingers, so to speak. And his 10 fingers are the Sefirot. You see? That's why we have 10 fingers. And just like we do everything, how do we do everything, right? We do everything through our fingers, right? And therefore, we are the model of the creation, and that's who we model. That's why we are in the image of God. Just like God has 10 fingers figuratively, which are the Sefirot, we have 10 fingers, and that's how we interact with everything, right? We make things, we shape things. Everything we do is with our 10 fingers, right? Same thing. But we don't know what the nature of the Sefirot are, because they are the greatest spiritual things of all. We have no idea. Just like we have no idea what a malach is. And a malach a Sefirah is infinitely greater than a malach. A malach doesn't create anything. A malach is a messenger. He's an agent of God. A Sefirah is a power of God. He uses it to create realities. If you want to look at it, you could say that the Sefirot are generators of spiritual energy. Right? Energy. Energy, nobody knows what energy is, right? But we do know that if you use energy, the only way things move is if you apply energy to it. But nobody knows what energy is, you see? But energy is what enables everything to move. Without energy, nothing happens, right? Same idea. You can look at the Sefirot as pure energy, if you want to look at it that way. And therefore, they can do everything. Just like energy can do everything, and especially according to Einstein, matter and energy are identical. So energy becomes matter, and matter can be turned back into energy. Even though we know what matter is, but we don't know what energy is. But Einstein said that energy and matter are identical. One is a different form of the other. Just like you have ice and water and steam. You see? Energy and matter are 2 different forms of the same thing. And we don't know what energy is. And the same thing with the Sefirot. So you can look at the Sefirot, as a generator of energy. But the energy that they generate isn't physical. It is spiritual. You see?
So I have a question for you.
Yeah, go ahead. Can you speak louder?
Sure. When the Mashiach ben Yosef comes,
yes?
You said that the Yesod has to connect to the Malchut?
Yes. Because, I didn't go into what each one does, but basically the Yesod, the upper 9, you have 9 Sefirot, which is Kesser, Chochma, Bina, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Netzach, Hoid, and Yesod. There are triads, 3 of them each. There are 3 sets of 3s, and Yesod pours into Malchut. Malchut is a keli. If you take, for instance, a look at a faucet, the Sefirot is like a faucet where one pours into one, which pours into the next, and so on. But all of them ultimately pour into a vessel. So Malchus is a vessel, and that vessel is really the shape of Olam Hazeh, this world. The whole creation really is Malchus, you see. So the Sefirot pour, 9 of them pour into the last one, which is Malchut, and that's ultimately what happens. But the bottom of it, you see, this what's called the faucet, that's Yesod, and that's the 9th. And the energy of Yesod, of the Sefirah of Yesod, pours into the Sefirah of Malchus, and that is a vessel. So that's what happens. Is ultimately, right now it's blocked. And that's why we don't really experience the future world. But ultimately what will happen is the blockage will be removed, and Malchus, I should say Yesod, will be allowed to pour its energy into Malchus, and therefore the energy is like a keli. The water will fill up the vessel, and that water is energy. It's a spiritual energy of which we have no idea what it is, but that will change the world. That will create the zikuch, you see. And that zikuch will change the physical world into higher and higher and higher worlds as the years go by. So ultimately speaking, that's what happens. That the Yesod pours into Malchus, which is the vessel, and the entire Bria is into Malchus. So once the vessel fills up with the energy of Yesod, then everything begins to change in Malchus. And that's the Zikuch. You see? Anything else?
So initially when you said that when Mashiach comes, we're waiting basically for the Yesod to connect to the Malchut, to pour into the Malchut.
Yes. In fact, I'll tell you. In order for the Mashiach ben Yosef to become the Mashiach ben Yosef, okay, then the energy of Yesod has to pour into Malchus. That's called the Pekidah. The Pekidah is when Yesod pours into Malchus for the first time in history. And that means that when it does, that means the Mashiach ben Yosef becomes the Mashiach ben Yosef. It's when he is appointed or designated. That's what happened when Moshe Rabbeinu went to the Sneh. He became the Mashiach, and then he went to Egypt. That was the Pekidah, which the Ramchal talks about in the Maimar Gula. And therefore he became Mashiach ben Yosef when the Yesod poured into the Malchus, and that was the beginning of his ability to redeem the Jews. Now, that's Mashiach ben Yosef. But in order for Mashiach ben David to come, you see, then you need Tiferet, which is above Yesod, in the middle as a triad, right? That has to now pour its energy into Yesod. So when Tiferet is connected or pours its energy into Yesod, and Yesod is pouring its energy into Malchus, that is the release of the Shekhinah into this world. And that is the era of the Mashiach ben David. And that basically, so far, has never really happened, you see. So we are waiting. So the Kabbalistic sign of Mashiach ben Yosef is when Yesod pours into Malchus. In other words, the blockage is removed. But Mashiach ben David does not come yet. He awaits Tiferet pouring into Yesod. And then he is released, and so is the Shekhinah. And the Shekhinah, as manifested from Tiferet, enters. Yeah, what?
When he is released, when David is released, that's the Pekidah of Mashiach ben David?
That's called the Zechira.
It's called the Zechira, right?
Yes. That's the V'yipoked v'yizocher by Yala v'yovoy. So the first thing is the Pekido, and then the second thing is the Zechira. And they are represented by two different Kabbalistic events. But the repercussions of that is Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And that begins the process where the divine presence now can unite with the physical world. But there's no zikuch. The world does not change. What does change is all those things that are a result of the zoyam, of the Satan, basically, which is decomposition. Everything degrades, everything dies. You see, that's called decomposition. That's all a result of the zoyamo. So the main idea of Mashiach ben Yosef and ben David is the removal of the zoyamo, to allow the divine presence to fully interact with the physical universe. And of course, that's going to change nature. You see, because nothing decomposes. Foods do not rot. Right? Nothing spoils. Because all of it is a result of Zoyamo. You see? So that's why everything will be unbelievably perfect. You see? Food will never spoil. Nobody dies. Nobody gets sick. All hospitals shut down. The whole field of medicine disappears. Not only that, but all of a sudden in that, because the presence of God is so revealed to each Jew, then each Jew will have hundreds of goyim as his servants. Like it says in the Navi, 10 goyim from the different nations will hold the garment of a Jew, because they're going to say to a Jew, we have heard that God is with you, and which he is. Because now the Jewish neshama is now open to experiencing God in a way that only a Novi can do. But they'll be much greater than Nevi'im. In fact, the average person in the time of Mashiach ben David will be a Novi probably as great as Moshe Rabbeinu. There will be no difference in Nevuah, you see, because then God will reveal himself to everybody equally. Now, could you imagine being a Novi as great as Moshe Rabbeinu? No, you can't. We have no idea what his Nevuah was. But that's what will happen, you see? So we are looking forward to an unbelievable time, which I believe is coming up very quickly. Very quickly.
How quickly?
How quickly? Well, I told you the Zohar, right? That 210 years before the year 6000, which is the English year 2030, you'll have Tchiat HaMesim. But in order to have Tchiat HaMesim, you have to have Mashiach ben David. But in order to have Mashiach ben David, you have to have the end of Galut, where everybody goes to Eretz Yisrael, and everybody has the Beit HaMikdash, right? And that's Mashiach ben Yosef. You see? So imagine if in 9.5 years you will have Mashiach ben David. Wouldn't that be incredible? See, that's based on the Zohar. And that is one of the reasons why you are seeing such unbelievable acceleration of current events. Like every day there's something new, and all of this is necessary to begin the process. And the real beginning of the process, the Geula, which is called Aschalta de Geula, is Mashiach ben Yosef. Because that's the same thing with the Sneh. The real beginning of the Yetziat Mitzrayim was when Moshe Rabbeinu, when God spoke to Moshe by the Sneh. Even though it got much more worse and so on, but that was the real beginning of the Geula. And that can happen any day. You see, any day, whoever is Mashiach ben Yosef. You see? And that's what's going to happen.
Rabbi, so
yes.
The Klippa of the Mashiach ben David, we still think is with the Shekhinah, correct?
The what? The klipa?
Yeah, like Mashiach ben David, did he stuck it with the Shekhinah underground, correct? With the kelipot?
Well, Mashiach ben David is surrounded by klipot, yes. And that does not allow him to be free. And the same thing with Mashiach ben Yosef.
Right. So what has to happen for David to be able to be released?
The Tikun.
So Yosef
That's what
has to do his job
what?
first, and then David could get released from the klipa?
Say that again?
Mashiach ben Yosef has to do his job first, and then Mashiach ben David could get released from the klipa?
Yes, yeah.
So
the first one that's released is Mashiach ben Yosef.
The releasing of the klipa of David is called Zechira?
Yes. Yeah. When the Zechira happens, then he is released from the klipa, which really means that he gets the Yechida, which is the highest level of Neshama. And the Shekhinah is also released, because remember, God does not interact with the world the way he could. In a certain sense, the light or the energy of God itself is surrounded by a klipa. Not literally, but God voluntarily submits to blockage, because that God is also in Galut, as he says. Everybody's in Galut, even God. And Galut simply means that you do not manifest your talents and abilities and your power openly or totally. It's all concealed. You see, and ultimately, when the Gula begins, all those klipot will dissolve with the death of the Zoyamo, with the death of the Satan, and then everything will just shine the way, we have never seen that.
So
Look,
Rabbi,
the redemption is...
Remember when we told you about that article that said that Shabbat Chazon, the Gematria was Tafshin Pei, and then Tisha B'Av also equals Tafshin Pei, and there's a lot of things associated with Tisha B'Av that was Tafshin Pei. You said possibly that's the releasing of the klipa of Mashiach ben David.
Yeah, Ben Yosef.
Oh, Ben Yosef, you meant.
Yes, yeah.
So once Yosef gets released his klipa, then if he's already living, he starts getting the ora, and that's when he could start doing his job?
Yes, correct. He can do his job when he is released from the klipa. It's like Moshe Rabbeinu.
Right.
Until the sneh, all he could do is be a shepherd.
Right.
What could he do?
Right.
But when God appeared to him, right, at the sneh, that was the Pekidah. And therefore he was messianic. He had the ability to redeem the Jews. You see, in other words, he would have unbelievable hatzlacha. Just like it says by Ben Yosef. V'chol asher oso, and everything he did, hitzliach Hashem biyodoi, God made him successful. That's the magic touch of the Mashiach ben Yosef. But that can only happen when he's released from the klipa.
So Rabbi, I have a question. So what we were talking about today, how we're going to change realities from the Asiyah all the way to Olam Haba?
Yes.
Do we get up to the Keter in Olam Haba? Like does
Yes, exactly. In other words, the Sefirah, all the Sefirot below Keter disappear.
Disappear?
Yes.
Wow.
Well, you have to understand, Keter itself has 10 Sefirot. What it means is that the Sefirah that illuminates totally, all the Sefirot illuminate, but they're much lower in degree. Keter has the energy of all of them combined, you see. So what happens is that the one that now illuminates or generates its energy is Keter. And we have no idea what that means, because that is the greatest force that God has ever created. And the Keter is the dominant Sefirah in Olam Haba. You see?
Yeah. Does the fast next week have anything to do with anything? Like, does it have any connection to anything we're learning?
Say that again. The what?
The fast.
The what?
Arba Tammuz.
I'm not hearing you.
The fast of Shiv'as Arba Tammuz.
Oh, the fast.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Does it have any connection to anything?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
We
I mean, I asked this question, what are the two greatest days, what are the two greatest days of destruction ever known?
Tisha B'Av.
You know what they are? What?
Tisha B'Av.
Tisha B'Av?
Yeah.
17th of Tammuz.
No, not really. Can you guess?
No, we have no idea.
Okay, the first day was Rosh Hashanah, because that's when Adam fell. Right?
Say that again.
The first day, which was the greatest destruction, is Rosh Hashanah, because that's when Adam was tested and he failed. Right?
Right.
Yeah. People don't think of it that way, but that's really what it is. Rosh Hashanah is the greatest destructive day. That was the first one. Do you know what the second one is?
Rachel says that when Moshe broke the Luchot.
Very good, Rachel. What day was that? When?
Shiv'as Arba Tammuz.
There you are. Rachel got it right. Exactly. Why? Because those Luchos Rishonos was the Or Mashiach. That was the Messianic right. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu should have been Mashiach. So when he failed, because of the Chet Egel, that was the first chance the world had to metaken, to correct the sin of Adam HaRishon. And they failed because of the Chet Egel. Therefore, Shiv'a Asa B'Tammuz is the second greatest day of destruction. Because both days, Rosh Hashanah and Shiv'a Asa B'Tammuz, were days when mankind fell completely. You see?
Yeah.
So you begin to understand what Shiv'a Asa B'Tammuz is. That it, like I say, it's the greatest destructive day. Much worse than Tisha B'Av. Why? Because Tisha B'Av is what?
Beit HaMikdash was destroyed.
Yeah, Beit HaMikdash. Okay, but Shiva B'Tammuz meant that there was no Mashiach. Moshe Rabbeinu, who should have been the Mashiach, almost didn't make it. Now, could you imagine? And the Mashiach would be the Geula. Moshe Rabbeinu and Mashiach ben Yosef. Could you imagine? That would have changed the whole history of the universe. The whole history. So, in terms of the consequences, the two greatest days of damage was Rosh Hashanah, because that changed man from a spiritual being to a completely physical, and it introduced the whole Hester and the Klippah and so on. And Shiva B'Tammuz, that destroyed the Geula, because that's what was supposed to be on Shiva B'Tammuz. You see? Tisha B'Av is, we are already in this state of physical, so it merely destroyed the Beit HaMikdash. See, most people don't realize that. They think Tisha B'Av is the worst, but it's not true. You see?
So
Isn't
Rabbi,
that interesting?
It is very interesting. How come they make the Sefirot connected parts of the body?
Well, that's a long lecture, because we are a model of the Bria. And there are 10 Sefirot, therefore there are 10 areas of the body that represent each Sefirah. The reason why is because we are a model. We are a model that duplicates the Sefirot. Yes. That's the image of God, if you think about it.
Right.
Because the image of God is really the 10 Sefirot. And the way they are shaped, their configuration, is the same shape as the human body. Head, right arm, left arm, torso, right leg, left leg, genital region. You see? That mirrors the Sefirot. So if you want to look at it in a certain way, a human being is an exact replica of the 10 Sefirot in the way they are shaped. That's the image of God. So in other words, if you could take the Sefirot and make it human, or give it a human form, it would look exactly like a man. In fact, I'll tell you one more thing. You want to hear?
Yes.
Yeah.
What is the name of God that we cannot pronounce? Yud Kei Vav Kei, right?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, now imagine this. Write a Yud, yes?
Yes.
Underneath the Yud, write a Hey.
Okay.
Underneath the Hey, write a Vav. And underneath the Vav, write another Hey. Like, doesn't that look like a stick figure of a man?
Huh.
The Yud is the head. The Hey looks like the shoulders and two arms, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Vav is his torso, right?
Right.
And the Hey is the two legs.
Wow.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Beautiful.
Yeah, isn't it? So you're looking at a stick figure of a human. Yud Kei Vav Kei, written down like Chinese, right? Down, right? You're looking at a stick figure of a human being. Because we are a model of God. That's the concept of Tzelem Elokim. You see?
Yeah.
Okay. That's great. Okay, I hope I've enlightened you.
You did. You have. We loved it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and, listen, as you keep hearing these kind of shurim, if you review the ideas, you're going to know far more than most people.
Yes. The goal.
I don't know if you realize that. But you'll not only have more information, but you'll have much greater clarity in the information itself.
Rabbi, can we learn the Kabbalah about this stuff?
I can't hear you. You sound very far away.
Hold on one second.
Can we learn the Kabbalah about the Sefirot?
That's what I'm doing.
Oh, this is Kabbalah that we learned?
Yeah.
Of course.
Oh, good. It doesn't have any more secrets that we want to know?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to continue with the Kabbalah, right? But you got to start somewhere.
So what does this have to do with the Sephardic and Ashkenaz today?
Well, this will lead into that,
Oh, it's going to lead
as you will see. Look, in order to know something, there's a process. You got to start from the beginning, you move on, and ultimately all the pieces come together, right? Same idea. In order to understand something fully, you need to have a beginning where you are introduced to the main ideas, the overview. And then you begin to put in the pieces. You ever put together a jigsaw puzzle?
Yeah, I don't like it.
Okay. Anyway, but and so that is this shiur was very Kabbalistic.
I liked it.
One question, Rabbi.
Yeah.
When they do have the resurrection of the dead, if we come back in Gilgulim, what body wakes up if the same neshama was in 3 different bodies, let's say?
The answer to that is you come back in the body or the Gilgul that you did the greatest Tikun.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah. So if you did more Tikun 300 years ago, you're going to get up the way you looked 300 years ago. But don't worry, they'll still know who you are.
That's what I'm asking you.
Well, obviously, because nobody's going to know who in the world is this, right? No, they'll know who you are because in some way you radiate your identity. Except you look different.